Okay, so we're now moving on from stories about Eliyahu in the Tanakh to Eliyahu as presented by our sages, by the rabbis of the Talmud. We're going to be looking at a lot of sort of seemingly random material that talks about Eliyahu in one way or another. Some of it is going to comment on the stories we've already seen, and some of it will be completely new ideas that the rabbis are bringing into our understanding of who Elijah was. So,
is there another one? Oh, yeah. Oh, back there. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Oh. Okay, so remember how Elijah just sort of appears out of nowhere and we know nothing about him?
Right.
So that bothered the rabbis also. And in Midrash Bereshit Rabbah, they have a little discussion where they ask, Eliyahu Mishalmi, Eliyahu was whose? Of which tribe did Elijah come? So Rabbi Eliezer said, from the tribe of Binyamin. And then he brings a proof text. Rabbi Nehorai says, from the tribe of Gad. And he brings another proof text. Let's look at the sources that they bring to prove what they're saying. So, Rabbi Eliezer says that Eliyahu was from the tribe of Benjamin because of a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, in Chronicles, part 1, chapter 8, verse 27. In our Tanachim here, that is on page 1908. So, 1908 is part of a listing, like a lot of the book of Divrei Yamim. It has all these genealogical lists, and so it's part of a listing of the descendants of Binyamin.
Oh, there it is.
And it says, who are some of the people who are from the tribe of Binyamin? Yareshia and Eliah and Zichri, the children of Yeroham. So there was some person in the tribe of Binyamin named Yeroham who had 3 children, Yareshia, Zichri, and Eliah. So Rabbi Eliezer, reading through Divrei Hayamim one day, probably came across this pasuk and thought, oh wow, now we know where Eliyahu Hanavi comes from. His father, who's never mentioned, must be this guy named Yeroham from the tribe of Benjamin. Rabbi Nehorai, on the other hand, says, no, you don't have to look so far away in Divrei Hayamim to find out who Elijah was and where he came from. The one thing we know about him, when he's first introduced, is that he is from the inhabitants of Gilad. Why is Gilad important? Because if we look in Yehoshua, in Joshua 13:25, we're going to be doing a lot of flipping back and forth. Okay. 13:25. Okay, so this is page 486. This is not a listing of genealogy. This is a listing of the borders of the tribal territories, as Moshe had determined and as Yehoshua parceled them out to the different tribes. So it says, "Vayitin Moshe lemate Gad livnei Gad lemishpachotam." Moshe gave to the tribe of Gad, to each of their families. And then what was their border? Past the town of Yazer, V'chol arei HaGilad, and all the cities of the Gilad, the entire region. And it keeps on going. So, if Eliyahu was from the inhabitants of Gilad, and we know Gilad is part of the territory of the tribe of Gad, then it would make sense that Eliyahu was from the tribe of Gad. Agree? Make sense? Sort of simple geographical calculation. So, the rabbis had the same question we did, and they looked searching through the rest of the Tanakh to find what other clues they could find. Rabbi Eliezer found a person named Eliyahu, without the vav, so just Eliyahu here, which is identified as being a member of a particular family, from a particular tribe, and says, okay, so Eliyahu Navi is from Binyamin. Rabbi Nehurai identifies his Eliyahu's home region according to the tribal boundaries, and says, okay, then he must be from Gad. But as these Talmudic discussions frequently do, you can't just throw proofs at each other, because both of these make sense, right? We have a name, we have a place, each of them are pointing in different directions. So the next thing they need to do is they need to explain what they do with each other's proof. So if I'm Rabbi Eliezer and I'm saying, listen, there's this guy named Eliyahu right there in the book. It says who his father was, what tribe he's from. This is obviously Eliyahu Hanavi. I need to explain why that's more important than the fact that Eliyahu is from Gilad, and Gilad is part of the tribal territory of Shevet Gad. Because they're not sort of hypothesizing the proofs. They're each working out of explicit proofs from the text. And so they have to figure out a way to explain away each other's sides.
But I'm missing something, because did it say anything in Chronicles about where those people were from? Was there anything that said that they couldn't have been from Gilad?
It could potentially have been, except that it would be unusual for a member of one tribe to be living in a different tribe's territory.
Okay.
I mean, everyone, like we know from Navot, people
Right.
were very attached to their ancestral homesteads.
Okay.
So, how does Rabbi Eliezer interpret the verse cited by Rabbi Nehurai? What does it mean that he was from Chovevei Gilad, from the inhabitants of Gilad? So he has to interpret it away homiletically or metaphorically. What does it mean he was from the inhabitants of Gilad? Gilad, as we know from the story of Yaakov in the end of this week's Parsha. Gilad is named after Galaed, the witness cairn. And so Rabbi Eliezer says, what does Toshavei Gilad, inhabitants of Gilad, means? It means the people who inhabit Lishkat Hagazit, the chamber of hewn stone, which was the room in the temple in Yerushalayim where the Sanhedrin would meet. So he has to do something with this verse that says that Eliyahu was from the inhabitants of Gilad, and he explains it away by saying Gilad here isn't the literal geographical region, it represents the place where the Sanhedrin meets. And so the inhabitant of Gilad means someone invested with authority, with the legislative and religious authority of the high court of the Israelite nation.
Meaning he was still a member of the tribe of Benjamin then.
Right. He was a member of the tribe of Benjamin, but he was also a member of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, okay.
And so what does Rabbi Nehurai do with Rabbi Eliezer's proof? So he does the same thing. He says that the names there are not literal, but teach us homiletically that when God wants to shake up the world, God remembers the merit of the ancestors for the children of mercy, and God is filled with mercy for God's world. Because what were the names there? They were Ya'arashia, Eliah, and Zichri b'nei Yerucham. So b'nei Yerucham means pitied, or someone who has mercy applied to them. Not someone who feels merciful, but who the mercy acts upon. That's what Yeruham means. And so he says, listen, B'nai Yeruham means the people who God treats with mercy. And Zichri, the name that appears in the list right next to Eliyahu, means remembrance.
My remembrance, sure. Sorry.
So therefore he does the same thing. Both of them, in order to interpret away the opposing proof, they say, listen, these names, whether of place or people, are not meant to be taken literally. They're meant to hint to us abstract ideas. And now it gets a little crazy. Once our sages were arguing over this matter. Some said from Gad, some said from Benjamin. When Eliyahu came and stood before them, he said to them, Rabbis, why are you arguing about me? I'm from the descendants of Rachel. He's like, you're arguing about a matter of like physical reality. Like, this isn't some kind of hypothetical halachic question of what's the status of this can of iced tea, and you can justify it in a million different ways because it's all theoretical until you get the psak and the law is decided. Like, this is a question of reality. Like, who were his parents? What tribe was he descended from? And he says, hello, I'm here to answer your questions. You want to know where I'm from? I'm from the tribes of Rachel. Which means that in this case, he's saying he's from Benjamin. Because there are 3 tribes descended from Rachel: Benjamin, Menashe, and Ephraim. Menashe and Ephraim are not under discussion here. Benjamin is, right. So according to this very, I want to say, what's the literary term? Deus ex machina? Where like the solution to the problem just appears out of nowhere with no good plot justification for why it happens. This I don't know what to make of this. It's like they're arguing about reality. They're trying to prove it from known sources. And then in the end, Eliyahu just shows up and says, oh, by the way, you're right, you're wrong. That's it. What's interesting, though, is that this is not sort of accepted as the final say, because there are other ideas about who Eliyahu was and where he came from, which end up being actually more popular in Jewish consciousness than he's descended from the tribe of Benjamin. Even though, according to this text, he actually answered the question for us. So I really don't know what to do with that mystery. Like next week, we're going to look at more stories in which he appears in rabbinic literature. This is more about what the rabbis said about him. And next time we're going to see more stories in which he appears. But here, like, they're talking about him, and then suddenly at the end, he's like, hello.
So if that were the case, then
Right.
Giladi does refer to the Sanhedrin reference rather than any kind of geographical reference.
Right. If Rabbi Eliezer is correct about how he explains away the other proof, it is potentially possible, like you suggested, that he could have been from Binyamin, but living in Gilad. And
Well,
maybe
in the sense that he certainly moved his way around, so I mean, it's not like so far-fetched, is it?
right,
like
no.
you said,
it's not. I mean, we know that people were very attached to their ancestral homesteads, but it could be that Chovevei Gilad, that he was from the inhabitants of Gilad, as opposed to meaning that's where his homestead is. It could mean he was a temporary dweller there. That he lived there, but his roots were not there. Except it's the same word as ger v'toshav that Avraham identifies himself when he buys the cave from Ephron. He says, he says, I'm just a resident alien. So toshav can mean someone who lives in a place without roots. as opposed to necessarily meaning specifically someone with roots there. So this source ends, he's from Binyamin. He tells us himself. Okay. But now we have another source from another Midrashic collection called Yalkut Shimoni. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, in the Talmud he's usually called Reish Lakish, in an abbreviation of his name.
The old Reish Lakish.
Yeah.
So,
Remember what's interesting about him?
He was the thief before he became the rabbi.
Yeah, he was a bandit, a gladiator. It ends up causing trouble with his best friend slash teacher slash brother-in-law slash arguing partner.
he sees him bathing, was that him?
Yeah, that's the beginning of the story. That's how he becomes a rabbi.
Okay.
Because they get this sudden intense relationship, but later on there's a story about how they get into an argument because they're discussing the impurity susceptibility of particular tools and implements, and there's some kind of knife or axe under discussion, and Reish Lakish says, "Oh, the ruling should be this." And Rabbi Yochanan says, "Oh, so you're a bandit. You know about weapons, don't you?" And he gets really offended that he's dredging up his
Right.
sordid past,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway,
So that's the guy.
yeah. Anyway, it's a very interesting person. Reish Lakish says, "Pinchas hu Eliyahu." Elijah is Pinchas. Pinchas from the Torah, Aharon's grandson, which means that he's not from the tribe of Benjamin. He's from the tribe of Levi. Not just Levi, but he's a Kohen. So let's try and figure out what's going on here. Why would Eliyahu be Pinchas? If you open up to... No, I lost the place because I was flipping to the other sources. Okay, to right before Parshat Pinchas. So this is Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 25, page 343 in your Tanachim. Okay, so the Israelites are camped on the east side of the Ordained River. Various things have been going on. And now we have a story about what happens. When Israel was staying at Shittim, the people profaned themselves, desecrated themselves by engaging in forbidden sexual contact with the Moabite women, who invited the people to the sacrifices for their god. The people partook of them and worshipped that god. Thus, Israel attached itself to Baal Peor.
Here we go again.
Huh?
Here we go again.
Yep, here we go again. It's another Baal.
Yeah.
I always like this one because anyone ever study Spanish? So Peor in Spanish means worse. Like this table is worse than that table, or that's Peor. So ever since I learned that in Spanish class in high school, whenever I see the name Baal Peor, I think not so good. Israel attached itself to Baal Peor, and God was incensed with Israel. So God tells Moshe to take the leaders of this idolatrous rebellion and put them to death. Moshe passes on the order to the judges, and then something dramatic happens. Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a midnight woman over to his companions in the sight of Moses and of the whole Israelite community who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So Moshe and the other leaders of Bnei Israel are probably praying to God, distraught over all this idolatry and other activity going on around them. At the center of the encampment, by the Mishkan, and this one dude brings his Midianite friend, who has been teaching him how to do these, idolatrous sex rituals. Who knows what exactly is going on here? And they go right in front of all the leaders, and they do their business. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Then Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aharon, the priest, sees this. He left the group, taking a spear in his hand. He followed them into the chamber where they were and stabbed both of them through. Then the plague ended. So the divine punishment that had been asserting itself among Bnei Israel as they were engaging in these forbidden activities suddenly stopped as soon as Pinchas took the initiative to do something drastic and run through this pair of people.
Zealotry.
Zealotry, exactly. Zealotry, very zealous. And how does the parsha named after Pinchas start? Just in the next pasuk here. God tells Moshe, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen turned back my wrath from Bnei Israel, bekan'o et qin'ati betocham, by displaying among them his passion for me, or by asserting my zealotry among them.
So that sounds a lot like what something Eliyahu would do.
Exactly. And so God says, I didn't destroy the people because of my zealousness, and therefore, Hineni noten lo et briti shalom. Therefore, I am giving him my covenant of peace. And it will be for him and his descendants after him as a pact, a covenant, a contract of priesthood for all time, because he took zealous action for God, atoning for Bnei Israel. So yeah, very Eliyahu-like behavior. The word qin'ah, zealotry, is invoked again and again and again here.
Does the timeline work out?
Not at all.
Okay.
If you take this identification literally, as some other references to this idea do, you end up having Eliyahu living for hundreds of years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Reish Lakish says, listen, same personality, same type of actions. Eliyahu and Pinchas must be identified with each other. They must be the same person. And so God said to him, this seems to be an extrapolation on this pasuk here in Pinchas about the pact of priesthood forever and friendship and peace. You have brought peace between Israel and I in this world. You stopped my anger. I was punishing the people for what they were doing, and you stopped it. You brought us back together. So too in the future, you are the one to bring peace between me and my children. As it says, Hinei anochi sholeach lachem et Eliyah hanavi lifnei bo yom Hashem. Behold, I am sending you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the day of God. Veheshiv lev avot al banim. And he will return the heart of parents upon their children. From the short prophet Malachi. Very end of Malachi. The last prophet in the prophets in the Tanakh. If you open up to
is this that from Shabbat Gadol? Is this the end of that?
Yes, I think so. Page 1410. There's got to be a listing around here someplace. Oh, you have a tikkun. Tikkun will say. Because part of the whole identification of Pinchas and Eliyahu is, if you look up the Haftarah for Pinchas, it's an Eliyahu story. Okay, so the very end of the last prophet in the Nevi'im says the following. Zechu Torat Moshe Avdi. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. Asher tzividoto b'Horev al kol Yisrael chokim u'mishpatim. Who I commanded at Horev, at Mount Sinai, with laws and rules for all of Israel. Hine anochi sholech lechem et Eliyahu Hanavi. Behold, I will send the prophet Elijah to you Lifnei bo yom Hashem hagadol v'hanora, before the coming of the awesome, fearful, great day of God. V'heshiv lev avot al banim v'lev banim al avotam. He will reconcile parents with children and children with parents. Literally, he will return their hearts to each other. Pen avov hiketi et haaretz cherem. So that when I come, I do not strike the whole land with utter destruction. And then if you look in here, it has that second to last verse repeated again, because we don't like ending books with destruction. So the final prophet says that before the great and awesome day of God, God will send back Eliyahu. For what purpose? To return the hearts and minds of families to each other, parents to children, children to parents. Bring the people to peace with each other, so that when the great and awesome and terrible day of God happens, God will not look at us and be like, what's wrong with you people? Why are you fighting? Why do you hate each other? I will punish you now. But in this midrash, they do something very interesting with that idea. Because what did he say? God says to Eliyahu, you brought peace between Israel and me in this world, so too in the future you are the one to bring peace between me and my children.
So this is God's prophecy for
Right. This is assuming that Eliyahu and Pinchas are the same person.
Yeah.
This is connecting God's reward to Pinchas of this covenant of shalom and the eternal priesthood with Malachi's later prophecy saying that Eliyahu is the one who will come before the day of God to reconcile everyone together. Bringing peace back into the family, into the people, and between the people and God.
Will he be Moshiach then?
No.
Accompany Mashiach.
Yeah, so the assumption ends up being that Eliyahu comes before the Mashiach.
So where is Eliyahu between Pinchas and Eliyahu?
Good question. I think according to this assumption that they're actually the same person.
Or the same neshama, or actually the same person?
Same person. Actually the same person.
Oh, okay.
Because the idea of, I just forgot the word for it.
Reincarnation.
Reincarnation only develops later, during the Middle Ages.
The idea does, but the actual...
Right. Okay. So if you accept reincarnation as a true doctrine, then you could assume that it was happening previously, but people didn't have the idea of such a thing until later on. But assumedly, he's just doing his job. He's being Pinchas, being a Kohen, working in the Beit HaMikdash. I'm just wondering about this, the way it's being used here. It seems to, instead to interpreting the idea of bringing parents and children together, as it looks to me like it's saying the children are us and the parents are God. God is our heavenly parent. At least that's what it sounds like to me, because it's saying that you brought peace between God and Israel in this world, so too in the future you're going to bring peace between God and Israel. And it says, me and my children. That's how God expresses it in this imagined conversation. So this equation is probably rooted in the idea of zealotry, in the personality similarity of the two figures. But the rabbis find sort of greater themes and threads running through their stories. And so connecting this idea that Pinchas did something violent and was rewarded with peace to Eliyahu, who also took violent, zealous action and ends up predicted in a different Navi to, in the future, bring peace and reconciliation between people.
And so obviously, as we said, the timeline makes no sense. So
Right.
how do the rabbis explain that away, or they just?
Long lifespans. I mean, in the Torah, people have absurdly long lifespans also, so why not after them?
Okay.
There's actually a source that I saw, but I didn't bring you here, that seems to be computing the minimum number of individuals who could form a 6 degrees of separation to the creation of the world. Because they start with Adam, and Adam lives for over 900 years, and Adam therefore overlapped with maybe Lamech, and then you just go these chains of people. And then if you assume Pinchas is Eliyahu and is living this whole hundreds of years span, then he's also very useful for this game. And then you just keep on going. And I don't remember where they got up to in the end, but it's useful for that.
No pollution.
Noah?
No pollution.
And then I know
To the environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, why? Because of creation?
No,
Because
I'm just saying
Eliyahu will
is that
throw fireballs at
because
you?
of all the chemicals that are in the atmosphere today.
Oh, so people live longer. Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so, silly question here, but why wouldn't he still be called Pinchas?
Good question.
That's a good
Well,
question.
don't people change their names? Because of,
Could be. Also, I mean, Eliyahu's a really weird name.
Well, does Pinchas mention again
Pinchas is also a weird name.
later on? Is
Not
name
really.
Pinchas?
Not really. Pinchas doesn't appear anymore. I mean, assumedly, the sort of straightforward understanding of the stories is Pinchas lives a normal lifespan and dies.
Is there a reference of his death?
No, I don't think so. He appears in Yehoshua, I think, and then that's about it. But not everyone is mentioned that they die, and even if it does mention they die, that doesn't necessarily mean that midrashically we have to go along with that. I mean, there's this midrash that says Yaakov, our ancestor, never died. It's he obviously died. The Torah says that he expired and he was mummified temporarily, and they took him back to Israel and they buried him. He obviously died. But the fact that it never uses the exact verb vayamot, and then he died, allows the rabbis to hyperliterally read into the words this sort of audacious idea and then try and figure out some kind of message to draw out of it. Okay. But back to Eliyahu, who now seems to be Pinchas, who's from the tribe of Levi, not from Binyamin or from Gad. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer said...
And that was Lakish that said that, right? Going back.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. That's Rish Lakish. Okay, now we have Rabbi Eliezer. And he says, God referenced the name of Pinchas in the name of Eliyahu. The fact that Eliyahu is described as Chovevei Gilad, from the inhabitants of Gilad, teaches that he brought repentance. Chovevei, not as in inhabitants, but as in tshuva. So Chovevei Gilad means the one who got other people to do tshuva. I guess he was more successful than he thought. He brought repentance to Israel at the mountain of Gilad. As is said, behold, I am giving him my covenant. My covenant was with him, life and peace. God gave Pinchas / Eliyahu the life of this world and the life of the next world. which might be a reference to him getting like drawn up in the storm, and gave him a good reward. It will be for him and his descendants after him an eternal covenant of priesthood, the reward that was given to Pinchas in the beginning. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish presents this thematically well-developed idea that these two zealots can be identified with each other. Now Rabbi Eliezer, following along and sort of extending it in new and interesting ways, saying, okay, it says Chovevei Gilad, and before we were arguing about whether that means that he's from this other tribe, maybe he's from this location. It says, no, if Eliyahu is Pinchas, then the primary function of all his zealotry, after all, in both of their cases, was to get the people to do tshuva, to get them to repent. So maybe Chovevei Gilad really is a reference to tshuva. And so once we sort of draw this connection, we can find all these other hints that sort of fall into place. And depending how convincing we find the whole idea, it can feel like, oh wow, look at all this evidence, or it can feel like they're just playing games. But the idea that they're trying to present about the similarity or identity of these attitudes, of these heroes who you probably would not want to bump into in a dark alley at night, is very powerful. Okay. So we just saw, using this pasuk at the end of Malachi, that Eliyahu is going to show up as like the herald of redemption, right before the great and awesome day of God, right before the Mashiach arrives. Eliyahu is going to show up to bring us back to each other, bring us back to God. So in the Gemara, we have a very interesting statement, which doesn't seem to bring any proof with it, but it's assumed. Kvar muvtach lahen leIsrael. It is already assured to Israel, to the Jewish people, that Eliyahu will not come on Erev Shabbat or on Erev Yom Tov. Why? Mipnei haTorah, because of the burden. Whenever redemption comes, it can happen at any time, but it won't happen on Erev Shabbat. It's not going to happen on Friday. Eliyahu will not show up and denounce, hey everybody, guess what? Mashiach is coming. The world will be perfected. Rejoin God, rejoin each other. It's not going to happen on a Friday. It's not going to happen on the 14th day of Tishrei or Nisan. Why? Because of the burden. So what does that mean? Rashi comments very helpfully on the Gemara there. What does the burden mean? That they would abandon their Shabbos preparations to go and greet him. I'm busy setting up my cholent. I'm busy making my parva chocolate pudding pie with chili powder. I'm busy making curry chicken. I'm busy cleaning the house, all these things. Eliyahu shows up. And we're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I have to go meet Eliyahu. I hope he doesn't think that I'm worshiping Baal. Everyone runs out and they abandon their preparations. The house is half clean. Their meals aren't cooked. And so it seems that there's this assumption there that redemption will not be annoying. That Eliyahu will specifically not come at a time which would inconvenience us. Which is a very big shift from how he behaves in the Tanakh, where he's doing a lot of inconveniencing of people in order to get his message across.
Well, he'd be inconveniencing praising Hashem and honoring Hashem, which is the opposite of what he was doing before.
Good.
right? I mean,
Good point.
Like Shabbat and Yom Tov.
Right. It's not just any inconvenience. It's an inconvenience of there's a mitzvah at work.
You'd be interrupting a mitzvah or
Right.
actually preventing a mitzvah from happening.
Right. And so there's this promise that that's not how it's going to happen. And there are further discussions in the Gemara about timing of the arrival of Eliyahu, the arrival of the Mashiach, in relation to Shabbat, the day before Shabbat, the day after Shabbat. I just brought this one as a example of how he appears here. That drawing off of this verse in Malachi, we now have sort of greater extrapolations based on it that we might not have expected. Okay. Okay. Ready for some more Gemara?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So this is from Leit Katan. This is in a discussion of mourning. When someone is in mourning because someone very close to them passed away or some other horrible thing happened and they rip their clothes, there are halachot about what types of, under which circumstances the rip you ripped in your clothes as a sign of mourning can be sewn up or not. Whether it has to be left that way. And so this discussion in the Gemara talks about these are rents that are not to be sewn up. One who tears their clothes for their father or mother, or their master who taught them wisdom. Hearing about God's name being blasphemed. If you actually look in the Hebrew here, it calls it Birkat Hashem, blessing the name, just like we saw by Navot, where they say he blessed, with sarcasm quotes, God and the king. Or when a scroll of Torah has been burned, or at the death of the various communal leaders, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the Av Beitin of the Sanhedrin, or on seeing the ruined cities of Yehuda, the ruins of the temple, ruins of Yerushalayim. And if you are in the area of Jerusalem and you see the temple at the same time as you see the destruction of Jerusalem, you rend first for the Beit HaMikdash, and then you rip it more for the rest of Yerushalayim. So we have a whole list of circumstances in which one is obligated to rip their clothes in mourning and never sew up that tear. How do we know this? As the Gemara frequently asks. How do we know this? How do we know that for a parent or a primary teacher, you can never re-sew this tear? From what is written, Dichtiv ve'Elisha ra'ah. Elisha saw it, v'hu mitzarek, and he cried out, Avi, Avi, Rechav Yisrael u'farashav. My father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen. We saw this. We read the story. Eliyahu gets separated from him by the fiery chariot, pulled up in the whirlwind, disappears into the sky, and Elisha watches, knowing that he is now receiving either 2/3 or twice as much prophetic power, and he calls out, my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen. So how does the Gemara understand this? Avi, Avi, my father, meaning, if your father or mother die, you rip your clothes. Rechav Yisrael u'farashav, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen. That means the same thing for one's primary teacher of Torah. My mashma. How does it mean this? Okay, so it asks a question. We got an answer. The answer still isn't clear. How does it mean this? Rabbi Yosef rendered it in Aramaic, translating the words and explaining. What does it mean? What is my father, Avi, Avi? It means Rabbi, my mentor, who was better protection to Israel with his prayer than chariots and horsemen. So my father, chariots and horsemen of Israel means my teacher, whose power of prayer was stronger than the military might of chariots and horsemen. And how do we know that these tears can't be sewn up again? They can't be reunited? From the same story. What did Elisha do? Vayikra'im. Vaychazek bevagadav vayikra'im l'shnayim kra'im. He grabs hold of his clothes and he rips them into two pieces. Once it says, and he ripped them. Do I not know that he rent them in two? It must be meant to teach that the severed parts ever remain apart in two. It could have just said, Elisha saw this, and he said this, he grabbed his clothes, and he ripped them. It doesn't say and he ripped them, it says and he ripped them into two pieces. And so using typical, standard, drashic, hyperliteral readings, every word has to have a meaning, every word has a significance, it has to be there for a reason. The Gemara says that he ripped them into two pieces, meaning he ripped them and now they have to stay two pieces forever. Under these kind of circumstances, where someone's parent or primary Torah teacher passes away, when they fulfill the mitzvah of ripping their clothes in mourning, they can never sew it back up. Said Reish Lakish, who we saw earlier, to Rabbi Yochanan, who we mentioned, his brother-in-law, verbal sparring partner. But Elijah is alive. He's alive. It doesn't say he died. He got picked up by the whirlwind, taken to heaven. It doesn't say he died. He's alive. So how can we learn laws about mourning and death from someone who's still alive? Like this whole Elisha thing, it just doesn't fit. So what's the answer? Since it's written there, Velo ra'ahu od, and he saw him no more, it was as if he was dead to him. There's also just a sort of a sudden, fascinating, just like drop. It's like, okay, he got picked up, he went to heaven. Okay, he got picked up, but what happened? What happened? Is he dead? Is he alive? Reish Lakish is confident he's not dead. He's alive. He's not here anymore, but he's not dead. And Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, fine, but because their relationship is now irrevocably ripped apart, we can learn the laws of ripping your clothing in the morning from Elisha and Eliyahu. But he's alive. It's like in a sense the Bnei HaNevi'im who were badgering Elisha are right. Like Eliyahu's just someplace else. He's not dead. He's just someplace else. The question is where? What's he doing? And if it says that he went up to Shamayim, but he's not dead, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Right.
I see a correlation between that and also the oath that Abraham had with the Pardes.
Okay. What about it?
There was that fiery flame that came through and separated the halves of the animals that
Right.
were sacrificed.
Right. Oh, so it's like the clothing that were ripped apart, or
No, just the same. It's similar. That it's an act of God.
okay. So you're saying that the flame that separates the two parts of each animal is like the fiery chariot that separated Elisha and Eliyahu?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. So what kind of...
But that's
Okay.
as far as I go.
Okay, yeah. No, so what kind of greater meaning could we
Just struck a
right. Right. I mean, we could tie it into this and say that just as the two halves of each animal are never going to come back together again, so too that fiery chariot separated them completely. And also represented the beginning of a new
Prophecy.
age of prophecy.
That's deeper than I was thinking.
Yeah, well,
That's good.
yeah, you started it. Okay. Okay, so we still got more Gemara sources. This one is going to be more narrative. This is looking at the stories that we saw in Sefer Melachim and giving us more details, more midrashic extrapolations, more filling in the gaps of what's going on here. And it's in a particular legal context, as many of these stories in the Gemara are. And the legal context in which the story appears is the issue of the Ir Hanidahat, the city where the people abandon God and go off to idolatry. And under certain circumstances, the city just is supposed to be completely destroyed. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan. Our rabbis taught, if it contained trees already cut down before the idolatrous city was condemned, they are forbidden. But if still growing in the soil, they are permitted. So you have chunks of wood, you have cut down trees in this forbidden city, then they are forbidden as well. It's probably assumed that if they were cut down, they've been being used for idolatrous purposes. But if it's still a growing tree, then it hasn't been desecrated in that way. But the trees of a different city, whether cut down or growing in the soil, are forbidden. But what does this source mean by a different city? Rabbi Chista said Jericho. For it is written, and the city shall be accursed to God. So the city of Jericho in Yehoshua, the first city that the Israelites conquer in Canaan, is completely destroyed. God tells them it'll be miraculous. You go around the city a bunch of times, blow the shofar, and the walls will come down. You go in, destroy everything. Don't take anything. It belongs to me, not to you. And so, even though on one level, in the legal discussion of the Gemara, it may be similar to this hypothetical case of a city which falls into total idolatry and therefore is completely destroyed. The rabbis say that there are different rules that apply to Jericho as it was destroyed to this hypothetical case of the idolatrous city and how it is treated. So, Vayishava Yoshua ba'itahi lemor, and Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, so now it's quoting from Yoshua, cursed be the man before God that riseth up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates of it. So Yeshua curses the city, basically. And he says that anyone who rebuilds Yericho, when he lays the foundation of it, their firstborn will die, and when he finishes and puts up the gates, their youngest child will die also. The process of rebuilding the city will cause death within the family of the rebuilder. It has been taught. So now we have some more Torah Shebaal Peh, more oral tradition explanation of this law that Yoshua was teaching the people. Neither Yericho with the name of a different town, nor a different town under the name of Yericho. So not only is it forbidden to rebuild the city of Yericho itself, but even if you try to change it by saying, oh, this isn't Yericho anymore, this is
Right. Kigo Harbor.
Kigo Harbor, yes. This is Kigo Harbor. It's the same place. There's no harbor anywhere near there. You're not fooling anybody. It's still Yericho, it's still forbidden. Or if you make a different city and you're like, what's a nice name for my city? Maybe I'll call it Kigo Harbor. No, that's a dumb name. I'll call it Yericho. That's also, can't do that. I don't know what this says about this town of Jericho, Long Island in New York. I have some friends who grew up there. It used to be my prototype of what suburbia looks like, but then I moved here. Yeah, so I don't know if it applies outside Israel, this rule against naming cities Yericho. But right before Eliyahu is introduced, when Sefer Melachim is talking about Achav and the dissolution of morality that him and Izebel bring into the people with their idolatrous ways, it actually says at the top of page 756 in our Tanachim, during the reign of Achav, this guy named Hiel from Beit El built Yericho. He set its foundations at the cost of his firstborn son Aviram, and he set its gates at the cost of Seguv, his youngest, just as the prophecy of Yoshua. Exactly. And then if you look, the footnote here in our Tanakh is very useful. It says, "Oh, go look back in Yoshua over there if you want to see where it says." So one of the things that Sefer Melachim sort of points to show how bad it was in the time of Achav and Izebel is the fact that this crazy guy from Beit El decided that he was going to rebuild Yericho, and the curse of Yoshua comes true, and he just keeps on doing it. He lost this child. By the end, his whole family is gone, and he just keeps on doing it because he doesn't care.
I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. So how does this relate back to Eliyahu?
We'll see that.
Okay.
So then there's a little discussion of should Hiel have understood the message? Like maybe one of his sons was good and one was evil, so maybe the oldest one deserved punishment in his own accord. So if you look about halfway down this long paragraph, it concludes, this teaches that he buried his children in succession from Aviram to Seguv, one after another. Now, guess what? Achav was his close friend. We're not told about this in the Tanakh. Sefer Melachim never says that Achav had any relationship with this Hiel guy. It's just like, oh, in the time when Achav was king, this crazy dude named Hiel decided to rebuild Yericho, even though Yeshua's prophecy came true. But we're filling in the gaps here. Why would it tell us this right now? So Ahav was his close friend. Ahav and Eliyahu went to inquire after his welfare in the house of mourning. They went to pay a Shiva call. Ahav and Eliyahu, together. At
Good
the
buddies,
house of
huh?
Chayel.
All of
Yeah.
a sudden,
Yeah, the house of Chayel. Ahav sat and remarked, Perhaps when Yoshua pronounced his curse, it was thus, neither Yericho under a different name, nor a different city by the name of Yericho. Eliyahu replied, that is so. So they're discussing the halacha of rebuilding Yericho in this Shiva house of the guy whose children just died because he rebuilt Yericho. And they're having a polite conversation, I guess. Achav and Eliyahu, they're not calling each other dirtier of Israel, enemy. It's having this discussion. So Achav says, if Moshe's curse was not fulfilled, for it is written, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them, and then God will shut up the heaven that there be no rain. So Moshe taught us in the Torah that if we do idolatry, there will be no rain. God will punish us by taking away our agriculture. Yet though that man set up idols on every single furrow, the rain did not permit him to go and worship them. Look around. There's idols everywhere. And it rains. The economy's great. Can't even go outside to worship the idols because it's so rainy. Agriculture is booming. Everything's fine. That didn't come true. How can it be that the curse of Yoshua, Moshe's disciple, has been fulfilled? Moshe's prediction has not come true. How does it make sense that the whole people could be engaged in idolatry, and Moshe said, if you do idolatry, God will stop the rain? It's still raining. But Yoshua says, if you rebuild Yericho, then there will be death in your family. And that does come true. How does that make any sense? That's not right. Maybe that means that it wasn't actually Yoshua's curse. Maybe he's trying to get Chiel out of feeling guilty by saying, oh, it just happened that way. God isn't really punishing you. Look, Moshe's curse didn't take place. What, you think Yoshua's curse is going to happen if Moshe's doesn't? Straight away, now we have the beginning of chapter 17. Elijah the Tishbite. Sorry, I guess I didn't proofread some of the translations as well as I could have. Why does it say Elisha instead of Eliyahu? Yeah, but Vayomer Eliyahu Tishbi mitoshavei Gilad Chai Hashem Elokei Yisrael Imi Yatal Matar. The beginning of Perek Yud Zayin, where he says, as the Lord God of Israel lives, no more rain. He prayed, and the key of rain was given to him. So now we know how he did it. Because we had the question, like, what, is he doing this himself? Mm-hmm. Did God tell him to do it? Did he ask God? What? So in this Gemara, they fill in the gaps by saying he prayed. He asked for permission. He prayed, and they gave him the key of rain. And then God tells him to go hang out by Nahal Crete, and the ravens bring him food. Oh, and here's an interesting detail, another detail in the story. So the ravens brought him bread and meat. Okay, we saw that. But where did they get it from?
Noah's Ark.
That would have been really tough to chew. And it's got to have been like a few thousand years earlier. I mean, I was in Cleveland yesterday and I bought jerky because the kosher butchers in Cleveland make beef jerky. I can't imagine what that would taste like after waiting 2,000 years in a decaying ark. But so that's not the answer. That's a good connection between the ravens. But what does Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav? From Ahav's slaughterers. Because Ahav, crazy, complicated Ahav, is bringing in all this idolatry to the country, but he keeps kosher. And Eliyahu knows this. And he knows he can trust that the birds are bringing him meat from Ahav's kitchen. Just sort of like all the additional details, just and all these different layers of. So now we're just going through the story.
Yeah, but
they're going through the story with extra details.
With explanation, right?
Yeah, filling in the gaps. So the Nachal dried up, as we saw. There's no rain. Now, when God saw that the world was distressed because of the drought, God tells him, go to Tzarfat. And then he meets the woman, and he has to deal with the death of the son of the woman. So Eliyahu prayed that the keys of resurrection might be given him. So he got this key to the rain. The key, the clicker that turns on the rain clouds, turns them off. So before he said, can I have control of the rain? Can I stop it? And God says, here's the key. Now, the son of the woman in Sarfat is dying, and Eliyahu wants another key, another cosmic power. He wants the power of resurrection. So he prays for the power of resurrection, as symbolized by this key. But what was the answer? 3 keys have not been entrusted to an agent. There's 3 keys, 3 powers in the universe that God always keeps for God's self. Of birth, reign, and resurrection. Shall it be said, 2 are in the hands of the disciple and only 1 in the hand of the master? So God says, listen, these are 3 special keys. These are 3 amazing powers, which I keep to myself. I don't give them out to just anybody. I gave you 1 because you asked nicely. Because you really needed it. I'm not going to give you 2. I'm not going to give you up all of these cosmic powers and give you more than I'm keeping for myself. It doesn't make sense for a human being, for a prophet, to have control over these phenomena more than God. So God says, I'm not giving it all up to you right now.
Is the Hebrew word for key the same? What does that mean?
So in Aramaic, it's aklida, and in Hebrew, it's maftechot.
And it's the same thing as a key in a door?
Yeah. Yeah, maftech, from the root patach, to open.
But this is metaphorically, right?
It's a metaphorical key.
It's not. But why? So why do you use the name? Why do you use the word key?
Because I think it's just imagine that the power is sort of locked up, and you have to release it. You have to open it. Like the rain are in this safe deposit box in the sky. If you want it to rain, you have to open up the safe deposit box, and then the water comes out.
Okay.
I mean, if we were writing this now, we would probably use some kind of metaphor with like remote controls.
Clicker.
Yeah, the clicker. The clicker of resurrection.
Is that used in the same way anywhere else in the Tanakh?
In Tanakh, I don't think so, but in rabbinic sources, yeah, I think so.
Okay. Interesting.
Are there examples specifically? I mean, keys are used to represent sort of the power over phenomenon. Okay. So bring me the other and take this one. As it's written, go show yourself to Achav.
Trade is always going to
Exactly. Fine, I'll give you the key to resurrect, but you have to give me back the key of rain.
Like taking a book out of the library, you got to bring this one back before you can take another one out.
Exactly. And so this is how they explain the connection between him bringing back the kid, and then the next thing that happens is God says, "Go talk to Achav because I want to send the rain."
I see.
So filling in the gaps. What's the connection between this and that?
'Cause
Now we
God
have
has
full
the-
logic.
Now God has the key for the rain.
Exactly. Yeah. A certain Galilean expounded before Rav Chisda. If one should make an analogy about Eliyahu, what does this matter resemble? A man who locked his gate and lost the key. Eliyahu said, "No rain." And then when it's time to bring the rain back, he can't do it.
Can't find the key.
God has to tell him, "Okay, I want to bring back the rain. Do this and this and this."
Do we know who the certain Galilean they're referring to is?
No, maybe if I had done some more extensive research, it may have been possible to figure out some theories.
I just wondered. Okay.
It's unclear because sometimes hahu, because the word here is hahu, sometimes hahu means like that particular one, or sometimes it means just some dude, some guy. But so here this Galilean is presenting for Rav Chisda this idea that it's like Eliyahu took the key and then lost it. He locked up the rain and was then unable to release it afterwards. Rabbi Yosei taught in Tzipori. Father Elijah was a hot-tempered man. Kapdan hava. He was short-tempered. He was easily angered. Now, Eliyahu used to visit him. Wait, what? Eliyahu used to visit Rabbi Yosei in Tzipori. But after this, he absented himself 3 days and did not come. So Eliyahu would come like every day to come hang out with Rabbi Yosei in Tzipori. Rabbi Yosei one day says, Eliyahu Hanavi, he couldn't really control himself. He had an anger management problem. He pushed people around. And Eliyahu stops coming to visit. Makes sense. I mean, if someone said that about me, I might not want to hang out with them either. When he came on the 4th day, Rabbi Yosei said to him, "Why didn't you come before?" And he replied, "Because you called me a kapdan. You said that I have no patience, that I push people around, that I can't control myself." So he answered, "But you just proved my point. You just proved you're a kapdan. I said you were a kapdan, and you stormed off for 3 days and didn't come to visit. That doesn't really show that you have an anger problem." So, I don't know. Eliyahu, like, suddenly appearing to people, hanging out with them frequently, like, 1,000 years later. I'm really not sure what to make of these stories, but we're going to see more of them next time. But it's amazing that once again, people are discussing Eliyahu as just a matter of learning. Like, who was this guy? Where was he from? What did he do? How can we fill in the gaps in the story? And then Eliyahu's like, "Hello, I'm here. Remember, I'm a person too. I'm still alive, as it were, as we saw from Reish Lakish." So it's not so it's not like he's just a deceased individual that we can talk about in third person and analyze. It's like somehow he's still alive. He's still out there, and he cares what people say about him. So I don't know how happy he might be about what I've been saying about him, but I think one thing that these stories are trying to teach us is that whether on some kind of physical level, whether on some kind of metaphorical level, like, Eliyahu lives on. Not just the fact that he keeps on appearing in these stories so much later, but like his spirit of zealotry, of sometimes things are so serious that they call for drastic measures, and yet at the same time we still need to learn the message of the soft sound, the kol ma'adaka. Like that tension lives on. Even if we don't necessarily actually have to worry about bumping into Eliyahu in a dark alley in the middle of the night. Okay. So, what was Eliyahu's issue? What was his problem? This is addressed in a different midrash. On the next side, on page 4. This midrash, I excerpted this from a longer discussion where it talks about Eliyahu and talks about Yonah, and it compares different prophetic styles. And it says that Eliyahu tavar kvod ha'av velo kvod haben. Elijah took the side of the honor of God and not of Israel. A Navi is supposed to be an intermediary between God and the people. The Navi is supposed to bring messages from God to the people, tell them when they're doing things wrong, when they're doing things right. But the Navi is also supposed to bring the people's needs back to God. Like Moshe, when he's up on Har Sinai and he comes down and he sees them worshiping the golden calf, and he flips out and he breaks the tablets and he kills the evildoers. He then turns around and argues with God to save the rest of the people and not negate the covenant that they just made. Eliyahu only takes one side, though. Eliyahu is only on God's side. He's not defending the people. He's just punishing them for them having betrayed God. Because that's what he says. He says, Kano kineti l'Hashem Elokei tzvaot. I have acted with exceeding zealotry for Hashem, God of the battalions.
I thought he's going to be the one that's going to bring God and the people back together.
Eventually. That's Malachi's prophecy. Mm-hmm. But right now we're still talking about Eliyahu here, when he's active. Yeah. So...
Oh. Pre-Elisha,
Exactly.
From the time he appears to the time he...
Right.
Sorry.
And so then... Right, and then what happened over there in chapter 19, after he says, listen, I was so zealous for you, proving the point that he's not balancing his role, he's only representing God and not representing the people. God said, get back on your way, go to the desert, go to Damascus, and anoint this new king there, and Elisha ben Shaphat as a prophet instead of you. And so, here they draw it out further. Instead of you, the Navi Tahtecha would not need to be said except to teach that your prophethood could no longer be born. Efshar ben Nevuatcha. You're gone. You're done. That's it. So the Midrash here is taking this incident and sort of filling in the gaps, just like we did when we were reading the story about what does it mean, what's God trying to show him, how does the response relate to the question. Here it's drawing it out. It's saying, listen, as a prophet, Eliyahu had 2 responsibilities, and he only cared about one. He only cared about punishing the people for their betrayal of God. He didn't care about defending the people from God's punishment.
Very much like Pinchas.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in the end, in sort of drawing out the details, they say that the sort of the clincher is this word tahtecha, instead of you. Not just make Elisha a Navi, because he's going to be a new kind of Navi, but he's going to be a new kind of Navi instead of you. Eliyahu is now fired, as we talked about when we learned that story. Okay. There's other midrash in Yalkut Shimoni that lists 9 individuals who entered paradise, entered Gan Eden alive. The first one is Hanoch, from the beginning of Bereshis, about whom it says he walked with God and then he was not, because God took him. And the second one on the list is Eliyahu. Which, this whole question is, what does it mean alive? Like, what does it mean alive? Gan Eden, paradise, what does it mean alive? Okay. And yet, even though he entered paradise alive, he attained this divine kind of status. There's an interesting statement in the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, where Rabbi Yosei says, God's presence never descended down to earth, and Moshe and Eliyahu never ascended up to heaven. As is said, Hashamayim shamayim l'Hashem v'ha'aretz natan livnei adam. The heavens are the heavens of God, and the earth God gave to humanity. Human beings belong on earth. Heaven belongs to Hashem. And no one has ever left their zone of control, their zone of proper location, and infringed on the territory of the other. God's presence never invaded earth, and human beings never invaded the divine supernal realm. But of course, because this is the Gemara, like, it's not just going to let this statement lie. Moshe and Eliyahu never ascended to heaven? What? What do you mean? Rabbi Yosei, that's completely, explicitly against the psukim that we saw. But it's written in Shemot, in Exodus, chapter 19. Moshe ala Elokim. Moses went up to God. He goes up Har Sinai, goes up Mount Sinai, and he goes to meet God. And it says he goes up to God. So what do you mean to say that Moshe never went up to heaven? So he has an answer. Below 10 fist lengths. This is a tefach, one of the fundamental halachic measuring units. And when Moshe went up to God, he never went more than 10 of these off the ground. It's like there's this boundary zone, this sort of liminal space between Eretz and Shamayim, between the human and the divine. And Rabbi Yosei is insistent. Listen, people don't cross that boundary. You can't take someone human and put them in the divine realm, because maybe that would imply that they are somehow divine in a way that would violate the uniqueness of God. And God doesn't come down to earth in the same way. God doesn't limit God's self in a way that would take away God's essential monotheistic perfection that we believe in. And so if Moshe is described as going up to God, the farthest he can go is some sort of minimal representative distance about the height of this table. So he goes up, he makes the connection, but he's never really left the earth. And what about Eliyahu?
Where do they get that? Where's the proof text for that?
Oh, for that specific distance?
Yeah.
I think it comes from the halachot of reshuyot, of zones, of like private and public domains. Because there are other discussions of Eliyahu actually, and how he like jumps around from place to place, and how can he do that on Shabbos if there's this law of Tchum that you're not allowed to travel outside an inhabited area more than 2,000 of these. And he's like jumping from like a city in Bavel to a city in Israel, and if he's alive, then he's bound by halakha. Because the dead are released from all obligations. But if we say that Eliyahu is alive, then he can't be violating halakha. And so if he's jumping from one place to another place, and he's crossing deserts and mountains and uninhabited wastelands, he's violating the law of the Tchum. And so one of the answers that they give is that maybe Tchum doesn't apply if you're above 10 fists from the ground.
Because you're not, okay.
Because you're not part of the domain, the zone. It's not defined that way.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And so...
So he's not fully alive. He's got like one foot in one place and one foot in the other kind of thing.
I think.
Is that how?
I think the way this is trying to present him as somehow making contact with the other realm, but still rooted on earth.
But how does that exempt him from?
Oh, he's not exempt. He gets around violating the law of the Tchum because he's flying.
So why can't someone be in an airplane and fly around than on Shabbos?
There would probably be other violations of Shabbat involved in that, but Tchum might not be a problem.
So that's interesting. So because you don't have feet on the ground.
Right. So the zones are only defined in a certain way, and so above that limit, he's avoiding it. So it could be related to that, the idea that zones don't extend infinity up.
So we had before this class we had a class with our rabbi about Shemitah, and we talked about like if you grow hydropontically, right? And would that count or not count because it's not really in the ground, it's floating. So it kind of maybe remind that of that.
Oh, cool.
So,
I get what you guys are talking about. I don't understand how that came from that last little.
Oh, just we're trying to figure out why 10 fist lengths? Why not some other distance?
No. But
That's
I mean, so you're saying that because Eliyahu went up above the 10 fist lengths?
That he didn't. The Rabbi Yosei is insistent that no one ever really leaves their zone.
That
God's place is heaven, and therefore God's presence doesn't come down fully. Human beings belong on earth, and therefore, even though it says that Eliyahu went up to the sky in the storm, he never really left the earthly domain.
So what did Elisha see, or what? Good
question. I think what's going on here is more philosophical than narrative. I don't think he's trying to change the story, because the story straightforwardly presents a storm, the sky. Eliyahu is clearly disappearing. But what Rabbi Yosei is trying to say, I think, is that no matter what happened, Eliyahu hasn't left his humanity, his mortality, his human status. That being pulled up to the sky in this whirlwind hasn't changed him into something other than a human being. The boundaries between the human and the divine have not been eroded.
Is that more for the benefit of the reader, so that we don't think that he is, so we don't start believing that he may be?
Could be
more than human.
Could be, especially since in the previous source, the list of people who entered Gan Eden alive, Hanoch, the first one, especially in the Second Temple period, there were all these mystical angelological meditations on Hanoch and how he gets brought up to heaven and he becomes the greatest angel who has some kind of power similar to God. And so Hanoch ended up being this kind of dangerously divine-like figure in various times in Jewish history. And maybe Rabbi Yosei is trying to defuse that possibility when it comes to Eliyahu.
That's what it feels like.
And and God delayed the flood because Noah was sitting Shiva for Enoch.
I think that's
If I get
that.
it twisted around.
No, I think so. That's a, if I remember correctly, that sounds like a midrash that correlates the timing of how long each of the individuals lived with the timing of the Mabul itself. That I'd have to check the numbers or check one of these nice books with all the charts in it. Because Hanoch was Noach's Hanoch Mitushalach Lamach Noach, his great-grandfather. So I don't know if Hanoch fits that timing or if it's Metushalach or Lamech who fit it better. But it does sound familiar. Yeah. Unlike in the Darren Aronofsky movie where Lamech dies when the water comes.
Didn't see that one.
Oh, I saw it.
Which one? The recent one?
Yeah.
I heard it was not good.
I loved it, actually.
Did you really?
But
Yes.
that it was
I
not.
I found
about
it
this.
fascinating.
Really?
But there was
Tell me.
not a lot of factual correlation.
Right. It was
right?
it was not like he took the story in the Torah and turned it into a script. There's a lot more there.
Really?
Which he did in a very fascinating way. But I might be biased because
I need to talk to you about that.
Darren Aronofsky's dad was my 7th grade science teacher.
Ah.
So I might be biased. And with that revelation, let's end the recording.